Hello and welcome. My name is Heather Hon and I'm the Minister of the Word at Koonung Heights Uniting Church. Thanks for joining with us today.
It is customary in the third week of Advent to light the pink candle and reflect on joy. That's the traditional focus for the week. But you might have noticed that I've chosen to light another purple candle this week and instead reflect on love. I don't mind telling you that I did have quite a long internal conversation about this, but kept coming back to some of the words from the prophet Zephaniah. Do not fear, the Lord your God is in your midst. He will renew you in his love. These words kept leaping out, and so I have been thinking about what it might mean to have God in our midst and how being renewed in God's love might show itself. Hence, we have another purple candle this week, a candle for love. Zephaniah is a little-known prophet who arrives on the scene after 2 generations where there has been no prophet. The book of Zephaniah begins as the prophet admonishes the people over their failure to change and their disregard for God's will. He warns them that God has lost patience and will intervene. As prophets are wont to do, he warns the people of the woes that are to come, but also softens the tone of his message when he conveys to the people a promise. Zephaniah understands something of God's character and knows that despite the impending judgment and all that entails, God will never withdraw from the people. These words, originally spoken to a people whose lives and homes will be destroyed by the conquering Assyrians, who will then evict them from their homeland, might have seemed a little ludicrous on the one hand, but also incredibly wonderful too. For within them is the promise that no matter what has happened or is yet to happen, the people's relationship with God will be restored because of God's love. Imagine how these words would have sounded to those who were in exile. At that time I will bring you home, at the time when I gather you, when I restore your fortunes. There is something special about being brought home. If you've ever travelled anywhere by plane, when you land, you hear the stewardess say something like, "We have now arrived at the city of Melbourne. To those who live here, welcome home." It feels different when it's the place you belong. I think it was Qantas who had the line, "Home, that's our most popular destination," in one of their successful advertising campaigns. Because it's something that each one of us can relate to, the idea of being home where we belong. The fact that God chooses to gather us and bring us to the place where we belong is all a part of our renewal in God's love. These ancient words are just as life-giving for today. Let's face it, there seems to be so much going wrong in our world. War, injustice, poverty and disease, just to name a few things. Sometimes these things are out of our control, but at other times it is our human choices which lead to the brokenness we see when we look around. Yet human choices can also lead to beauty and greater wholeness, and to amazing, awe-inspiring acts of self-giving love. The world is a place that holds all of these things. But when we are defined by God's love rather than the confusion and brokenness of the world, it is that love that holds and renews us. So then, as people who are loved and renewed, what do we do? This is the basic question that the crowd who came to see John were asking. As they asked what to do, John tells the people to do what they know is right, to love others, to act with justice and mercy, to make sure that whatever they are doing is done with love, with care, and with a conscience. He tells them that when they have power, they should use whatever they have for the good of others. There is an ancient story about a monastery where all the monks were old, tired, and waiting to die. They'd lost their fire for God and had long since ceased to really care about one another. Although they shared the same living space, prayed, ate, and worked together, each lived in his own world with heart and mind turned inward. No one came to the monastery, no visitors, no new brothers. The buildings were in need of repair, but the monks didn't care. They felt it wasn't long until there'd be no monastery to worry about, as it would all turn to dust. Then one day a holy man visited them. He was a monk himself. For a time he lived with the old brothers, prayed with them, talked with them, and worked and ate with them. He was wise and loving. The brothers turned their hearts and minds outward and listened to him. When the time came for him to leave, this holy man stood before the brothers who were bidding him farewell and wished them God's peace. Some of the monks shook their heads sadly. There's nothing here for us now that you're going, they thought. But the visitor's last words to them were, Christ dwells in your midst. Then he walked away. Well, the brothers were quite astonished. They looked at one another with surprise. Which one of them could be the Christ? Surely not Brother William, who never arrived at the chapel on time and never did his work either, for that matter. Surely not Brother Mark, who annoyingly slurped his soup. Surely not the abbot, who was always gruff with everyone. Christ would never be late for chapel or neglect his work or slurp his soup or be gruff. Yet their visitor was a holy and reliable man who had spoken the truth to them the whole time he was in their company. This too must be true. One among them must be the Christ. So each of the monks began to treat the other as if he were Christ, for they didn't know who it was. They looked for ways to serve one another and were kind to one another and shared with one another. Each did his work as a gift to the Christ who was among them. Each honoured his fellow monk by listening with full attention and respect. They began to overlook little things that had annoyed them about one another and began instead to see what was in every person. Life began to flow back into the dying community. A vitality and joy was reborn that had been lost for many years. The people of the town nearby learned that something had changed at the monastery. In curiosity they came, and in love they were received. Each was graciously welcomed and made to feel at home. Every effort was taken to care for their needs, and each monk accepted visitors as they were. Men, women, and children came to be refreshed and renewed. The brotherhood grew as men came, even from far away, to join the community. All the visitors and the new brothers were treated as if they were the Christ, for the wise monk has said, "One among you is Christ." John was the first to point to Jesus and proclaim God in our midst. It is what we continue to do, particularly at this time of year when we retell the story of the God whose love is so profound that the beloved child is sent into the mess of the world to give us hope and to guide us in the way of peace. Seeing that God was in their midst, the monks were renewed by love that was transformational for them and those around them. When we live with God in our midst, we too can contribute to a changed future. Just like John, we might not think we are worthy, but that's not the point. Whether we are worthy or not, the point is that we are loved. Amen.